the bigger your network and the more solid those relationships, the easier it is to solve a lot of those problems. So, you know, what may have taken, you know, multiple emails and phone calls and maybe a meeting turns into just a simple phone call. Hey, can you please help me out with this? And normally it's done. And, you know, that kind of, those kind of relationships and those kind of contacts is invaluable. Like, it's not recorded on a balance sheet or a financial position for a business. But to progress things forward with that kind of speed is just, you can't quantify it. Then generally a conversation will become, you start disagreeing with your friends. You know, you become a bit more defensive. You know, you put walls up. You defend your point of view, and you stop listening to other people. And for me personally, that's a general pattern that I've just noticed that happens. Whereas if you're, let's just say you've taken some MDMA, and it could be in a festival setting or just in a house setting, and what I've noticed is that it breaks down barriers and walls, and allows, especially towards the end of the night or the end of the time that you're sitting around socializing, more kind of intimate parts of a conversation will come up, and you'll start discussing things that are more personal to you and that you might not have discussed before. You know, and then you start hearing other people's points of view. And because of the chemical reaction in your brain, you become more empathetic and more understanding. And so you let that point of view come in, or you let that perspective come in. And that might alter the way you see something, or it just might alter the way that you view that person or their behavior, but generally in a compassionate way. And I'm not going to speak upon the science, although I've read, you know, some reports that is the case, that is what's going on, and it seems to ring true. And I think that's a super interesting thing, and I think that's when I really started to understand or listen to other people's points of views, or the way they see things, or the struggles that they have, that I wasn't aware of before.
Hello friends, and welcome to another episode of Couple of Lattes with your host, me, Jacques Massey. I'm on a mission to give people wings and roots, and Couple of Lattes is a podcast designed to offer simple solutions to your perceived problems, empowering you to take charge of your life. Couple of Lattes brings powerful conversations with some of the most insightful people in the world straight to your ears. You can listen to new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your chosen podcast platform, and you can even watch it on YouTube. Anyway, time to create some purpose and find some meaning in your life with this episode of Couple of Lattes. Welcome back to In Conversation. Today's guest is my good friend and someone I look up to in many ways, Jason Harvey. Today's chat is an exploration into his life as a serial entrepreneur. His stories go from selling ice at music festivals to creating an incredible global coffee brand called Common. Jason is also a remarkably spiritual person, and it's really interesting to discuss his spiritual evolution. And also, as the title suggests, we dive a little bit into MDMA. This is going to be a really interesting chat, Entrepreneurship and MDMA, with my good friend, Jason Harvey. For anyone who wants to get in contact with Jason Harvey, find out about the amazing coffee he does through Common with his business partners, you can check out the links in the description below. And let's get into this conversation with the powerful, the legendary Jason Harvey. And this is obviously biased because I'm your friend, but I think you've had a pretty interesting life in terms of the variety of things that you've done. I think to start with, like, I obviously know you, but anyone who's listening to this right now doesn't really know you. So who are you? And then tell us about your journey, and specifically the diverse things that you've done in regards to being an entrepreneur. Like, I consider you a serial entrepreneur. You come from a really entrepreneurial family, but then also, like, you've kind of done all this, what most people would consider maybe extreme stuff, like your circumnavigation of New Zealand, for example. So maybe
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about who you are, Jason, and then tell me about your journey from,
All right.
I guess, when I met you through to now.
I suppose. Okay. Well, obviously. Name's Jason. I kind of grew up on the North Shore of Auckland, and I guess probably one of the prominent turning points is actually before I met you, Jacques. And I guess I grew up in a very, very supportive, loving family that was allowed me to pursue whatever I was interested in, really, which was pretty cool. And I guess, in reflecting back, I was very fortunate. I didn't really probably realize that at the time. And as you go through life and you meet people and you experience different cultures, you kind of realize how fortunate that was. That wasn't the norm. So that was pretty cool. And mum and dad, they ran their own businesses together, so it was quite a tight family dynamic. And dad always dad was always quite encouraged us to plan and save, and I guess any bit of new material he came across on his personal journey, or he would share with us. And so I kind of had a really fair idea what I wanted to do out of school. I was just finishing up being really into my surf lifesaving, and then I wanted to study travel and tourism, and I wanted to take off and travel. And I'd saved a decent amount of money. And anyway, I ended up in Jersey. I got offered a job to lifeguard in Jersey, and I thought, okay, that's a good place to start. Go to Europe, have a job, have some income. And anyway, while I was there, I was reading quite a lot of adventure books, Sir Edmund Hillary, Touching the Void, lots of mountaineering kind of stuff. And I did save a bunch of money, and I got back to New Zealand, and I'd had this big trip, but I kind of came back to New Zealand with more money than I left, and and I was like, I could have done more. I could have. Did I miss out on heaps of stuff because I was kind of too focused on pursuing this career in travel and tourism, or making sure I had enough money saved in the bank? Did I miss out on lots of things? And so I kind of got back and I went on a bit of a spending spree. I just kind of started spending the money that I'd saved. And I know that might come as a bit of a surprise to some of my friends from school, because they used to hassle me for being a bit tight with money. But I'd watched it for so long, and then all of a sudden I just lost any kind of attachment to it. So that was a really big change that I just kind of slowly made. And then I was going to return to the UK again to kind of travel more. But I got an opportunity to study at AUT University in the outdoor recreation. What was it, not a degree but a diploma?
It was a diploma, yeah. That's where your life. That's where your life began, Jason. You met me, mate.
Met this little Portuguese guy that kept antagonizing me. I guess that's and then that set off. And I mean, I kind of got into that because my auntie, my mum's youngest sister, had been living in the UK for 20 years, and she came back and she started studying this course, and I was seeing her quite often, and she was just telling me all about these things that they were doing, and I was like, that sounds pretty cool. And I'd been reading these adventure books from the year before, so I was like, let's get stuck into that.
It seems like a bit of a sign from the universe at the time, huh?
Yeah, I guess you could say. I don't know, it just kind of felt right. And and so we got into it, and I speaking to a good mate of ours, Quinn, last week actually, and just reflecting on how good a time of life that was, how much fun that was. It was hard in aspects, but we were away so much. We traveled heaps. We were learning pretty cool skills that were, I think, they were pretty transferable, I reckon. I found them pretty transferable, and with a really tight knit group of people. It was a small group. It wasn't like your typical go to a lecture with 400 people. You were in a group of 20 people. So
between 20 and 30 people. I think the other thing as well is, I guess it plays on your kind of growing disattachment with material. Right. And like, I don't know about you, but I was so fucking materially poor that entire course, and noodles were always the go-to meal because trips and beer were prioritized.
Yeah. Didn't you come live with us for a little while?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. The meals were a bit better then, weren't they?
Oh, they were amazing.
Yeah, I guess I was fortunate enough to still be living at home, and and mum and dad had a business in Australia at the time, so they weren't around too much. So I kind of had the house, and my sister was in America, so I kind of had the house to myself, which was which was quite cool. So we did that diploma, and and then you're kind of like, right, gonna get a job in the outdoor education. You start instructing and all that, and and other things in life. My girlfriend at the time, I met a girl, and she was living in Auckland, and I was living in the South Island, and I decided to stay in Auckland and finish off my degree, which was pretty cool. And,
I forgot you'd done the degree.
Yeah, so I stayed on in that, and but I think all the time I was at university, I always wrote my papers around organizational development or people development. I'd always try and take that spin on it. I was interested in how people developed as individuals, or how companies use the outdoors as a medium and to facilitate whether it's employee development or organizational development. And that was always an interest for me. So I always wrote my literature reviews, and I did my major project on designing a course for surf lifesaving, who I was working for at the time. So, and I guess that's where the business part kind of came in. My parents had their own business. I was always really interested and supportive by what they did, and then I had the the outdoor the outdoor interest. So I guess that's kind of how the two came together.
And what led you to do the circumnavigation?
I guess that was I was heavily involved in surf lifesaving. It was kind of like it was a really strong community as well. I guess between university and surf lifesaving, that was like the two aspects of my life at that point in time. And I guess reading the books in Jersey, like like crossing the South Pole and traversing the Andes and the expeditions to Everest, like they were just that sense of adventure, pushing your body to a limit, was just fascinating to me. And a couple of friends who were quite involved in surf lifesaving, I kind of overheard the conversation, and they said that that's what they were thinking about doing. I hadn't really known them for too long, and I kind of just latched on and just said, right, I want to be part of this. And so I kind of took up the role of like safety and planning, and kind of like did all the mapping and the weather stuff for the route, and we managed to coincide it with 100 years of surf lifesaving. So it wasn't easy to get funding, but it was like a way to celebrate an organization that's like pretty core to the communities across New Zealand. So that was an integral part of the trip, but also the challenge of seeing if we can get around New Zealand in less than 40 days.
And how was that experience for you? Because I guess because we both did this course in the outdoors, and I've always considered the outdoors and nature as something that's incredibly spiritual for me and something that really connects me. There's almost kind of a longing for it, and it makes sense when you consider our history as human beings. For 200,000 years or so, we were literally always consistently in nature, and then we're in this environment now where we're so surrounded by not nature that you almost feel like once you get a taste of it again, there's just this incredible longing for it. And recently, while I've been in Melbourne and we've been in this lockdown, I've had days where all I've wanted to do is just be in the bush, just completely surrounded by nature. So I guess that experience for you doing that circumnavigation, like what did you kind of feel during that experience? Did you feel more of a connection? And what did you kind of see?
Um, it's probably something that you reflect upon more. Personally, it's something I maybe reflect upon more than at the time. I guess I was part of a group and we had a task at hand and we were quite focused on that. And, you know, and there was different personalities at play that kind of played themselves out across the trip. And you take into account like fatigue and, yeah, that was pretty interesting. I found that interesting. I think at that point in time, I was more interested in the people side of things as opposed to the actual environment. And I think that kind of played out at university as well.
Mm, mm,
I made comment to you a few months ago that, you know, maybe one of the lecturers that we took for granted the most was a guy named Ray Hollingsworth,
mm.
who maybe was trying to teach us stuff that was a bit before our time. You know, it makes more sense now than what it did at the time. You know, I often remember he would stop us on a path and asked us to stand in silence for 10 minutes while like the birds came around. And I was like, what, you know, he'd often joke, like, what's this guy doing? But it's just the pure act of like stopping and like taking in what's going on around us. And then, you know, and hopefully later on, like a reflection on how you're a part of that. But I don't know if that didn't really fully sink in at the time. It's something I've kind of looked back on more. Yeah, I guess to circle back to like the trip around New Zealand, I think that the remoteness of some parts of New Zealand was pretty awesome. There was a time when we were off the very bottom of the Stewart Island and crazy tidal movements and like whirlpools swirling around the island, and we're right at the far tip, and we'd come ashore, had some lunch at like what would be New Zealand's most southern beach, and then we went to the tip, and we made a habit of we had a little hip flask with us, so we had a little swig of whiskey at the north, the south, the east, and the west kind of extremities of New Zealand, which was pretty cool. And you know, like when you're sitting down there, you're like, all right, so the next piece of landmass is really Antarctica from here.
That's
and
insane.
It is pretty vast. Yeah.
I get
that was pretty cool.
I get what you mean as well, Jason, about the whole reflection thing. When you're younger, I think especially as a young male, and I can't speak for young women, but I feel like young women in general tend to reach this level of connection with, you know, spirituality and nature before men. But this is obviously speculation because I don't know the science behind it. But for me now, like a couple of the trips that I remember doing with you, like that kayak around Great Barrier, for example, and we had that last night with all the dolphins that came into the bay, and we swam with those dolphins, and then they waited all night for us to kind of wake up in the morning and say goodbye.
Yeah.
And that experience, like now I reflect upon it as just such an incredible experience. But back then it was just a bragging right that I could tell my friends, whereas now it's something I hold with me incredibly dearly. So I kind of relate to that.
I mean, I hadn't even really thought about that moment until you just raised it. But yeah, that was pretty insane. Actually, I've never, you know, I've had close encounters with dolphins before, but never to the point of just like sitting in the water with them swimming around you, and like, you know, you can reach out and touch them. That was pretty insane. I don't know. I guess maybe I don't know if maybe you learn the lessons that at the point in time in which you need to learn them. So I don't know. If you need to connect with nature, and that's the experience that's offered, then that's what you'll maybe reflect on at that point in time. But if you need to connect with yourself, or if you need to connect with other people, then that's the experience that you probably are offered, and that's the part of it you'll reflect upon at the time.
When you're younger, you kind of don't really, I don't know, you're just not as present in moments like that. But as you get older and you reflect back on those moments, you kind of, I don't know about you, but I kind of almost crave more moments like that of just being, because in that moment with the dolphins, for me, for example, and maybe for you, it was down the most southern tip of New Zealand. I don't remember thinking about anything else but the dolphins. I was like literally there, completely and 100% there. And I guess for me, that's this idea of mindfulness and meditation. And when you're that age, you don't really think. You're just like, oh, sick, hanging out with dolphins. I'm going to go tell all my mates about this later on. But now I kind of understand the importance of those tiny little moments. And that, like in the morning, for example, when I see the sunrise now, I'm like
Yeah,
so unbelievably amazed at what I'm seeing. But 22-year-old
yeah.
Jack would have just been like, oh, cool, I saw the sunrise. I'm going to tell my mates I woke up early. They'll think I'm
Yeah.
cool.
I mean, you alluded to maybe a difference between males and females and stuff. And obviously, I'm not same as you. I'm not going to speak on behalf of females, but I would say it's actually more an age thing, or like a. I think what and maybe males are more prone to expressing this, but I would say that like when you're young, like as a kid and into a teenager, you're kind of trying to figure out who you are and your place in the world. And you go through the education system, and then you go through university. And as you're going through university, like the way in which we structure it, we become quite certain. Well, we think we become quite certain of who we are and the way the world works, and we form these, through our friends and our family, and we form these perceptions of the world and how it works, and we form quite strong beliefs, and they can become quite rigid, and this is where you get some cultural divides and so forth. And then I think if you're fortunate enough to drop some of those beliefs and perceptions, I think as you get a little bit older, you kind of realize, actually, I don't really fully understand how all this works, and I don't really fully understand like my place in the world, and I'm okay with that. That's fine. I've still got more to learn, and I know that might be counterintuitive to some other um, you know points of views, but I think that's just that's how I see it personally.
Yeah, I think that's a really elegant way to put it, Jason. And I think you're definitely right. And yeah, I guess you're right. Like we can't really comment on the difference between males and females in terms of whether they kind of develop this insight earlier than one another. But
Yeah.
maybe if someone's listening and they want to reach out and tell us, then that would be great. But yeah, I kind of agree with you on that front. Like when I was younger, like in my early 20s, I was like, all right, like my life is totally sorted. Like I know everything I need to know. And I'm just going to live my dream life now. And then life happens and all of these unplanned events happen. And like you say, you realize more and more that actually you really do know nothing. And the more that you can embrace the fact that you really do know very little, and there's no definitive certainty around life, the easier it almost becomes. So I guess my question for you would be, you know, after this course at uni, and we almost kind of went our separate ways in terms of what we did for a while, and you went deep into, I guess, entrepreneurship, but then you also got into the festival scene. Tell me about that journey and how it kind of changed your point of views from being almost like this fixed mindset that you were when you were younger into where you are now, which is someone who I consider to be, very open-minded and just really keen to continue this path of growth and learning and understanding.
I guess, yeah, I guess it probably comes back to that like kind of sense of adventure, and I think I'm not going to say that it's innate in all of us, but like I think it is a very humanistic trait to like want to know a bit more and explore a bit more. And I think that if it hasn't been provided to us in our education systems or by our very close communities, then you either accept your perception or you choose to go, all right, well, how can I find out more? And and a lot of that then comes down to travel, doesn't it? Because if you immerse yourself in different parts of the world and different cultures, then you don't really have any choice but to like start to try to understand a different way of thinking or different complexities that exist. So I think it was maybe just that, and it's just probably a timing thing. Like and a year earlier, I'd broken up with my girlfriend at the time, and I was in a job that I did really enjoy, but I struggled with like the bureaucracy and some of the moral decisions that I didn't think aligned. And I just stood my ground, and I said, they offered me the job back, and I just said, nah, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that, and I'm not going to do that. And off I went. Yeah. So I went to Europe with actually no real plans at all. I kind of traveled through Sri Lanka and Indonesia, and ended up in Europe with an old friend that I hadn't seen in years that used to play water polo with, and we ended up going to a few music festivals, and then it just all kind of started to happen kind of fast. We went to a few music festivals. We were in one in Berlin, and it was pretty hot, and the beers were pretty warm, and it's kind of seemed absurd that you couldn't buy ice. And so we found the nearest petrol station, and we went and bought some ice to cool down our tropical punch that we'd made. And we woke up the next morning a bit daisy, and the Dutch and German people that we'd met, they'd been out to the supermarket to buy ice for round two, and then on the next night we went out again, and we had to drive around 3 or 4 petrol stations because lots of people had gone out to buy ice, and it just happened that people had seen us walking back in, and they'd go, "Where'd you get that from? Where'd you get that from?" And and by the end of the festival, you couldn't buy ice in any of the surrounding towns because it all sold out.
I know the pain.
It's just kind of absurd. It's such a simple concept, and anyway, I guess I don't know how I describe it these days, but a bit of blind optimism and just the desire to do something different. And I guess mine and Ash's life kind of, he was working in the corporate world in New Zealand, and he wanted something different. And we sat down and kind of on the back of a piece of paper jotted down like what good we think business can achieve, and they kind of aligned, and away we went. Put in a bunch of applications, and at the 11th hour, 3 of those applications became successful, and chucked some money in and started a business. Yeah.
And what was the business?
It was selling ice at music festivals.
It's so good. It's so good. I love it as well. I love it as well because then I guess the added bonus was you were at the stage in your life where you were trying to almost explore things in terms of your spirituality and going to festivals and maybe trying a few drugs. And then you're like, well, actually, if we start this business and we sell ice, we can actually get access to these festivals, do all the things we want to do personally, but then we also have a business that we can bring in some extra income on the side. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, that's how we imagined it would work.
And how did it actually work?
Well, I had a dual citizenship to the UK, and so, given the fact that me and Ash couldn't speak any other languages, we decided the best place to launch the business was the UK. And yeah, just I didn't know anybody, didn't know. We ended up on a farm in about half an hour south of Birmingham, of all places, that my parents had previously bought a camper van off the neighbor, and I got his phone number, and I rang him up, and I was like, "Hey, look, you don't know me, but looking to start a business. Can we potentially just rent some space to refurbish the shipping container on your farm?" And Martin said yes, and there we were. And and I guess you chuck a bunch of money in, and we did 3 festivals, and it's some pretty tough lessons. I remember one festival, the first one was like, it was like bucketing down with rain, and there was people laughing at us that we were selling ice. And one day we turned over 7 pounds in a whole day. That's we're open for 12 hours. And it's in New Zealand or Australian dollars, it's a little over $1.20 an hour. It's
Man,
just
that's unreal.
It was, and then we went to the next festival, and I guess on paper the festival kind of it kind of broke even, or we made a small profit, and because we'd put all this money into the shipping container and investing into this country, we were like, well, the coffee at these festivals is pretty shit, so why don't we sell some coffee and ice? And so we found some Kiwis in London that had set up Coffee Roastery, and a few other people that work there, they liked festivals as well. So that seemed like a good match. And so we started doing coffee and ice. And
so you're basically hitting both target markets. If it's raining, they can get coffee. If it's sunny, they get ice.
Pretty much, yeah.
And if they really want to have an iced coffee, well, you got the ice already there.
Yeah, something like that. And so that's what we did. We tried it once, and it worked enough to keep us interested. So we decided that we would spend the start of year 2 like applying for more festivals. And we still had the dream of being in Europe, so we applied for a bunch of European festivals and UK festivals, and and we didn't end up getting any in Europe, but we increased the volume of festivals we did, and and so that kind of we convinced ourselves to do year 2.
Yeah. And how did year 2 go compared to year 1?
It started really well. The first 2 made small profits, and then we had our 3rd festival, and it was super sunny, and we went a lot better than we ever expected. But then it kind of came crashing down at the 4th festival, and just made some silly mistakes and kind of got ripped off a little bit. But you learn who you should work with and who you shouldn't, and so I guess at the end of the season, it did actually wash out in a small profit, and we took all that money and we tried to open a bar in London to turn the business from a seasonal business to a year-round business. But we obviously still had more lessons to learn, and that bar was opened and closed within 6 weeks, and everything was gone.
Oh, jeez.
I guess you keep I don't know if they were repeated mistakes, but they were just like kind of novice mistakes that I guess you have to learn along the way, whether you learn them in year 1 and 2 or whether you learn them in year 5 or year 10. You're still going to learn them at some point in time.
Well, I think what you're highlighting here in a way is, I've got a couple of takeaways that I wanted to talk about. One was it's really crazy to see the contrast between your 2 trips to Europe, because the first time you went and it was super structured, and you were working the whole time, and you came back with more money than you had, but you still had in the back of your mind, you're like, but have I really experienced anything? Like, have I really kind of had any significant growth, I guess, from this? And then your second trip, you turn up, less planning, you just turn up, you meet a friend, you go, well, fuck it, we're at a festival, there's no ice, let's start a business, let's sell some ice. And then you start selling some coffee, and then you make some mistakes, and then you make even more mistakes. And now you're probably sitting in a point where you wouldn't be able to return home with more money.
Yeah.
At the same time, you've had all of these experiences, and you may have seen them at the time as, holy shit, this is a big failure, but really, like, those are such huge opportunities for growth. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think at some point in time, like, you do have to commit to something. I think it's worthwhile to commit to something. And like, I guess after that second big failure, we kind of agreed that, like, okay, our time here in the UK is done, and we were going to return home. But at the same time, we'd built up a network, and we'd learned a lot about the UK, and we'd learned a lot about the coffee industry, and we were starting to make observations and have an interest. And so, while we're kind of drowning our sorrows and finishing off all the leftover alcohol from the failed bar, we after a few weeks of deciding that we were going to go home, I turned to Ash and I said, do we really want to go home though? Like, is that what we really want to do? Or can we take what we've learned and apply it to something fresh? And you know me quite well. I've always been quite like stubborn and determined, and so we just rolled from one business into the next, and some people we'd met along the way who lent some incredibly generous favors to give us an opportunity to start again. And I guess that's how I ended up in Scotland. Yeah. But I think it's like, I don't know how, I guess you find a way to like, I don't know, self-justification about why you make decisions and the reason. And I think that the way I always looked at it was that I was all those decisions I made along the way were heading in the right direction, but they just might have been an alternative path, to get there. So, I think if at any point in time I felt like, my life was going not in a positive direction, it probably would have been a red flag to do something different. But ultimately, I just felt like, it always felt good, and it was going in a healthy direction. So just carry on. And I guess a little bit of background to that is that I think I mentioned earlier that I've always been interested in organizational development in the outdoors, and that's something that I'd ultimately like to get back to or revisit. But I thought it would be, whilst I studied all these things and had all these ideas, and you could probably go into a business where you set up these programs that help individuals and other businesses using the outdoors. I just thought it would be a bit hypocritical to not have any understanding of what it takes to actually build a business or run a business, to then offer advice on how to someone else to improve theirs. So, you go, well, why don't I give it a go of like, starting a business, which of course is a lot harder than doing the university. The academic side of learning about the outdoors, or even teaching in the outdoors, and those are hard skills and they are fun, but the complexities of running a business is pretty challenging. So I guess that's how I looked at it.
100%. And I think a couple of things I want to touch on there is, first of all, like, that's one thing that I've always admired about you, Jason, is your ability to make decisions and just stick to your guns. Like, obviously you mentioned before you come across as quite stubborn, but I think over the years that stubbornness has evolved more into just your ability to look at problems objectively and just go, you know what, there's a solution to this, I'm going to find it. And when you find that solution, you make a decision, which a lot of people tend to struggle with. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people away from, starting their own businesses, or I guess committing to continuing the adventure in business. Because when you have that first failure, like, we're laughing about it now, right? Like, you had an ice truck and then you put your money in a bar and in 6 weeks it was closed and you were drowning your sorrows. It's like, for a lot of people, that's fucking huge. Like, you invested in a bar and then it failed in 6 weeks. Most people would go, well, fuck it. Like, I'm giving up. I'm done. But your ability to go, well, okay, like, this is just another bump in the road, and then commit to the trajectory anyway. I think it's something to be really proud of. So that's one thing I wanted to acknowledge you on. No problem, bro. And I guess, what was the other question I kind of had? I've kind of lost my train of thought now. I was praising you too much.
It's very kind, mate.
But I guess, what's the kind of takeaway we can get from this is, you were kind of mentioning before how, when we're younger, especially in our early 20s, we spend a lot of time exploring, and like, you traveled a lot. I know I traveled a lot, and we kind of have this idea in our heads that, freedom, which I think is almost a bit of an illusion anyway, but, freedom is to do whatever you want, and you don't need to worry about money, and there's no bosses, and you don't need to commit to anything. But as you get older, and I think you have these experiences, which you've had a lot of now, these failed experiences, you can either choose one of two paths. You can either spend the rest of your life never committing to anything and living an illusion, which isn't freedom at all, or you can make a decision to go, you know what, like, I've explored, I've seen a lot of things, but I need to commit to something in order to, I guess, have that underlying purpose in my life. Is that something you kind of found at this transitionary point?
Yeah, I think that you know what it's like when you move around a lot, you get tired of moving around. So like, that became, I mean, we literally, in those first 3 years, I have this orange bus, and we lived and started a business from an orange bus, and there was bunk beds in the back of it, and like, me and Ash basically slept above each other, moved ourselves to the table, opened our laptops, worked for the day, traveled around the country. It was like, that's a lot of fun, but it's like, it's also it's a pretty challenging environment to do a bunch of this stuff, and there's no space or anything. So I think a big part of like the move to Scotland was, and I'd met Caitlin at the time, who is director of Common, and so we just wanted to just kind of settle down and just stop moving around. And so I think for the first time in over 3 years, it was the first time I had an address in the UK that wasn't like a friend's couch. Yeah. So that was a good thing. And then I think it's the realization is like, okay, I've learned all this stuff, but we are essentially starting a fresh business, again, and there's a lot of building that needs to happen, and and a lot of that takes time. Like if you want to build a brand and sell a product, you need to build a reputation, and as much as you want to try and sweeten deals with pricing or fancy branding or advertising or whatever avenue you choose, I guess the most organic way to do it, or the most solid way to do it, is to build relationships. And people don't trust you, and you don't trust other people until you get to know them, and you do that over a period of time. So you got to stop moving and focus on something.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to add to that, two of the things I just got out of what you said is, you just said the first one, which is focus. It's almost impossible to focus on something that you really enjoy and that you might want to turn into your passion or your business if you're continuously moving and jumping all over the place. So it's really important to like pay attention, I guess, to those, I guess you could call them corrections, the failures, the things that happen that don't go the right way, and allow them to get you more into a place where you can focus on the path ahead, right? And then the other one is consistency, which you highlighted in relationships. If you're consistently building these relationships and consistently working on whatever it is you want to work on, then things are going to happen over time. But if you're moving around all over the place and jumping between things, which I did a shitload in my 20s, nothing ever sticks.
No. And I think you can see that in like I got friends that have not traveled as much, and they've built businesses up in New Zealand and stuff, and and then they've achieved what's admirably like some very solid success, by doing so. And it gets easier. Things get easier, because essentially all you're doing constantly is like you're learning, solving a problem, so forth, right? And the bigger your network and the more solid those relationships, the easier it is to solve a lot of those problems. So what may have taken multiple emails and phone calls and maybe a meeting turns into just a simple phone call. Hey, can you please help me out with this? And normally it's done. And that kind of those kind of relationships and those kind of contacts is invaluable. Like it's not recorded on a balance sheet or a financial position for a business, but to progress things forward with that kind of speed is just you can't quantify it.
So would you say in terms of like, if someone's listening to this right now and they're at that point in their life where they're like, okay, I've done a bunch of amazing things, but now I really want to settle down and focus on this one passion of mine and maybe create a business like you have with Common, which I guess we'll go into a little bit. You can maybe explain what Common is and all the things you're working on now, but would be to prioritize those relationships.
Yeah, I think that's with your friends and your family that you do hold close to you, and it's impossible for us as we go through life to maintain every relationship that we make, and we all know that. And maybe as you get older, we realize that the amount that we need to make us happy is slightly smaller than when we were maybe a teenager or in our 20s. But it's important to do so. And so, I think, I couldn't place enough significance on creating a good network around yourself of friends and family, and and people in a professional capacity as well.
So let's go back to, I guess, Jason's storyline. So now you're in Scotland, right?
in Scotland, in Edinburgh.
And you've actually got an address, and the bus is parked up. I think at this point in time, you actually had some mechanical issues with the bus anyway, didn't you?
I think so. Yeah, for sure. It was parked up for a while.
So talk me through Common, and I guess maybe try and incorporate all the lessons you'd learned from all those, I guess you could call them failed business ventures, or I guess the opportunities you learned through those business ventures. How did you apply those into Common, and then I guess create a more long-term viable business?
Okay, that's a long question.
It was, wasn't it?
I'll try and dissect it. Okay, I guess okay, so from a foundation point of view, we've always wanted to conduct a business in a way that is environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable, and financially sustainable. And Ash and I, and then Caitlin as well, we've always maintained, and this has remained true through all the things that we've done, is that I think that business can be like a voice for good within our communities and within society. And quite often in the media, especially with large corporations and kind of fraudulent and immoral behavior, businesses gets painted with the same brush as like they can be greedy. And I just think that's simply not the case. So those are the foundation things. Then, and they were important to us in the events business, and they're important to us in Common. Then there's the coffee specific stuff that we kind of took. And whilst coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world, it's a huge $1 billion industry, but it's kind of split into without getting too technical, it's split into two parts. There's commercial or commodity trade, or commercially traded coffee, and there's specialty traded coffee, and it's to do with the point system. Anyway, we operate in the specialty part of the market, and that makes up somewhere between 10 and 15% of the entire coffee industry. But what we found through our first few years in the event, when we're selling just coffee at music festivals, is I found it a little bit unaccepting. So it was a new trend. When I say new, it'd been 10 or 15 years in the UK, probably 20 to 30 years in New Zealand and Australia. Like you would go to like these tasting events, and people would say, "Oh, this coffee tastes like bergamot and lime zest," or something like that. I don't know, whatever it was. And and people would be walking around the room, and I don't know, you just felt like it. I personally felt, and those that like Ash and stuff, just that it needs to be more accessible. Like this product needs to be more accessible. It's kind of like fine wine a little bit, or like whiskey. It's like if you don't know, then you're not allowed in, kind of thing. And I know a lot of your listeners are in Melbourne, and Melbourne's probably progressed past this stage. And Melbourne is would be considered the capital of specialty coffee in the world.
It's amazing. I think here's something, maybe let me know if you agree with this or not, but there's almost been a transition to I guess what you're describing almost is like kind of the snobbery around, it's very exclusive in terms of that specialty coffee, whereas in Melbourne it's just converted to the entire population has become the exclusive snobbery population, because everyone here is a little bit of a coffee snob, but it's not, it's not particularly people. It's just everyone just loves specialty coffee here, which I guess you don't really get in a lot of places.
Yeah, maybe some of like the rhetoric's toned down a little bit. Or anyway, I mean, if everyone has their own approach to it, and we just decided that we wanted to take a simplistic approach, and we just wanted to have 4 products that are really we moved away from like, and a lot of the industry has done this now, but like when we first launched, we were one of the first companies, I think, to move to this, and we used pastel and bright colors. We weren't using black and white with like sharp corners, and so we tried to like liven it up a little bit, the way in which we communicated information was kind of more like we led from a simple flavor profile. So we went with strong, sweet, bright, and complex. And then whilst the traceability of the product and the details of the product was still super important, we presented that information secondary as opposed to straight off the bat. And so we didn't really do anything different. We just changed the way in which we presented the information to the customer, and then we launched. And we had some pretty good feedback and exposure from day one. And so that was good. And then we went through this big phase of trying to raise money. A lot of startups, especially in the UK, they're trying to build a brand and they're trying to raise capital, and there's a whole lot of different approaches to doing that. And so we went through that process, and we didn't manage to raise any, and it was a little disheartening at times. We had a few offers that we thought undervalued what we'd achieved, maybe because we overvalued what we were trying to do. But anyway, cut the story short, we basically went through this process maybe 2 or 3 times trying to raise money, and then we had offers and we declined them, and then in hindsight we've managed to close enough hit our sales targets, and grow a business to a point where it's probably going to turn a small profit in year 3 and turn over, not a huge amount, but a significant amount without any investments. We haven't diluted any of the equity, and and it's one of those things. It's kind of like, it is a hard way to go about it, and at times it's hard not to look at your competitors and see what they're doing, and you know what budget they have available to them to do that, because it's expensive to run marketing campaigns and update packaging and have a fancy website and all that kind of stuff. And when you don't have much money to play with, you just do what you can. And I think the whole team has always been pretty resourceful. And we've managed to get it to a point where we've got a couple of cafes and a wholesale business and an online retail business, and it's all heading in the right direction. And it's been a global pandemic and it's been challenging on everyone, but we've got a small team now, and it's good.
And I guess, like, regardless of whether there's a global pandemic or not, the fact that you've diversified your business in such a way that people still want coffee. I mean, you're drinking a coffee right now, and like, coffee is one of those things that unless all of the coffee beans in the world run out, people are going to keep drinking coffee. So you found yourself a niche which is, I guess, black swan proof in a sense, or COVID proof. A couple of things I just quickly pulled out there, bros. Do you think the fact that you didn't get any sort of outside investment made your team more innovative in a way? Do you think if you'd kind of, had that extra equity, you would have maybe not have had to be so innovative in solutions?
I think it's the best way to answer that question is to only hypothesize. And if you want to ask me in 10 years' time how it all played out, then I think that's the best way to answer it. I think what you learn to do is you learn to be resourceful. You learn to be dynamic in your thinking. And I think what is super important, and I think the pandemic has really highlighted this, and I think it's really important to the overall conversation around sustainability, is that you learn to be financially prudent. Like, you kind of like, you watch where your money is. And you look at the little things, and I think that's super important. You can read all the business books under the world, and eventually they all kind of say the same thing. And watching how you you spend your money, and managing your finances is super important. And sometimes when you have a lot of money available to spend, you spend a lot of money. It's not necessarily spent well. It's difficult to comment when you're still in the very initial stages of it. But if you're making observations, then that would be an observation.
Yeah, I guess since we've kind of fallen into a bit of a topic on finance, I guess for individuals listening to this, regardless of whether you're wanting to start a business or maybe just achieve your own kind of financial security, or maybe even financial freedom, the important point there is it all comes down to watching your money and spending less and having more available to invest or start businesses or purchase things that are going to allow you to accumulate more wealth. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has different priorities on like how they spend money, right? In our personal lives and in our work lives. And I think, I learned not to, when you go down this path and you live on the an oily rag for quite a while, I guess I didn't not spend money on going to see my friends or going to a birthday, or I haven't taken many holidays, but when there was an opportunity to take a holiday, kind of just try not to watch too much about how much money I was spending whilst on holiday, because I think whilst it is important to watch that, you don't want to stress about it either. And because financial stress is a horrible thing, and it can kind of cripple us. And I think if you were to sacrifice your own kind of physical health or mental health or the health of those around you in order to be financially stable, then I don't think either's going to work out in the long run. So, it's a hard question to answer. Like, it's important to watch, and like if it comes to like big ticket purchases, or it's like, well, how much is that going to return? Do I really need to spend that? But then when it would be like, oh, should we all go out for a team dinner and beers? Can't technically afford it, but no, we should definitely do that, because that was important to like team morale, or to like celebrate small wins or something. If you're continually saving in those areas, I just don't think it's it's worthwhile. And I think this is just my honest perspective on it. It's like we didn't skimp heaps on like where we chose to live, or like I couldn't think of anything worse once we moved out of the orange bus and into a place to like go and do 10 or 12 hours days to come back to a place that you weren't enjoy, or it wasn't comfortable to be in, because then you just dread being at home. And I don't think that's healthy either. So it is a balancing act, and I think we all have our own priorities. I think if you can strip away a lot of like the material spending and place it on like stuff that benefits our health or our mental health, then I think that's where you make the choice on how to spend your money.
I think that's a really good way to put it. And I guess I wasn't really thinking about that when I asked you the question, like what's the point in sleeping in shit and feeling shit for years and years and years and years on end to attain maybe a specific financial goal, and then getting there and realizing that wasn't actually your goal in the first place. Your goal was actually just to feel more joy and feel a bit more happiness in your life. And by giving up 10 years of skimping out on everything, like hanging out with your friends and connecting with your family and going on those important trips or having those important business trips, you kind of end up getting to, I guess, your perceived goal of where you thought you'd be happy, and realizing, well, hold on, I'm not happy. Maybe I need to make the decision to just be happy first. And maybe that does involve spending a bit of money hanging out with friends, or spending that time with people you care about, or investing in things that bring you a bit of comfort and health, like having a gym membership or having a nice bed that allows you to sleep 7.5 to 9 hours a night instead of, tossing and turning in your sleep and stressing out about the following day. I think that's really important what you just mentioned.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's super important. And I think I think it's been well documented now that we can't link our happiness to like material collections or material wealth. I think it's been proven, or it's been proven time and time again that it doesn't work. So you need to be happy along the journey. That's not to say it's not going to be hard or you're not going to be challenged, but then that's what your community's for, to kind of help you and support you through that. It's been a challenging few months personally for me, but like the friends that I've made back in the UK have been outstanding, and friends like yourself and here in New Zealand as well. But I'm technically in isolation at the moment in New Zealand. But so I think that the importance of that can just never be underestimated.
And I guess that comes down to probably one of the underlying things we've been talking about without realizing is, and you mentioned it, is that importance of those relationships. And I think a lot of people, so I don't know if you kind of understand the science behind happiness, or you've done much research into it, but there's kind of these two parts to happiness, right? You have hedonic happiness, which is moments and experiences, versus eudaimonic happiness, which is purpose and meaning. So that might be something like you, for example, having a business, something that every day you wake up and it gives you meaning in life. It makes you feel as if your existence is warranted, I guess, to put it in a really blunt way. Whereas hedonic happiness is what we often falsely attribute to material things, right? So what ends up happening is people fall into what they call a hedonic treadmill, where you're constantly running to achieve a new materialistic target, right? $1 million, that mansion, that yacht. And all of these things aren't actually really what hedonic happiness is. Hedonic happiness, when you really look at it, is moments and experiences which bring you joy. And it's healthy to have those, but then it's also more important to develop some sort of purpose and meaning, because eudaimonic happiness is long lasting, whereas hedonic happiness is short-term experiences. But the problem is, a lot of people think, okay, short-term experiences will give me hedonic happiness, but they don't realize that those short-term experiences are best experienced in relationships or with laughter or those simple things in life, right? Going for a hike with a bunch of friends and seeing an incredible view, that's hedonic happiness, versus buying the latest series BMW and driving around and hoping people will acknowledge you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but those are new terms to me, so it sounds pretty accurate. But would you say that it's important for those things to be in balance?
Yes, definitely. I think more and more,
because obviously you've talked about too far one way to, is it hedonic happiness?
Yeah,
but too much emphasis on the other would mean that you miss out on those hedonic moments.
Exactly.
And that's not healthy either, right?
Exactly.
Because
I think that's where, like, I think you meditate quite a bit, and obviously you've kind of explored this area of psychedelics and MDMA a little bit yourself as well. And I think that's one thing people are waking up to more and more. And I hate using the term waking up, because probably people will be like, oh, woke. But I'm not meaning it that way. I'm meaning in terms of, more and more people are kind of understanding that, this hedonic happiness, so this like laughter in a moment, or this moment with the sunrise with someone beautiful next to you that you have a lot of love and compassion and kindness towards, is so important. And what that ties back to really is what we were talking about way at the start of the podcast when you were talking about your circumnavigation and our experience with the dolphins, is that feeling of just being in a moment and experiencing that happiness, that joy. And I think meditation has taught me to do that a lot more. I mean, obviously I'm nowhere near mastering my ability to control my anxious thoughts or my ideas of want and craving. But when I do experience those moments, it's as simple as, like, the other day I was sitting in a park and there was a pigeon bobbing its head, and I was so fucking happy, dude. Just watching this pigeon, like, just bobbing his head. And the reason I was so happy was because I was experiencing a form of hedonic happiness, just being in that moment and just enjoying that exact moment.
Yeah, I think, I do a little bit of meditation. I think one thing I've learned, like I don't get me wrong, my dad meditates a lot. I've read up a lot about meditation. I do a little bit myself, and I 100% see its benefits. I think that as society goes through this phase of like addressing mental health and becoming more mindful and stuff, I think, and I would say meditation is one of the most important tools that we can use. But I don't think we should get caught up on it, because what happens is that it's not for everyone. And it's not, it's something that's blasted across social media and any kind of journal you read. And, so people that might be struggling with something, or people that, trying to kind of reconnect, and they try meditation and they don't like it and they don't enjoy it, then they, there's something wrong with me, and it perpetuates a cycle that's not healthy. So I think it's important that we talk about the other areas in which you can experience like a meditative state, and so it's been extreme sports, so like rock climbing, surfing, I think yoga are considered some of the most meditative sports you can do, because you're so focused on the moment, that and essentially that's what you're doing in meditation. We're not focused, but you're like trying to be in the moment. From my understanding. So I think, and things like gardening, or for some people it might be just like walking their dog with no one else around, and they stop thinking about everything else, and more living in the moment. And I think those are just as good a forms of meditation. So whatever kind of works for you, I think it's important that people try meditation, maybe just not from just from the breathing aspect of it, and like just thinking about the breath, whether it's in a stressful situation, or whether it's an actual meditation practice, or whether it's in yoga, or whether it's just sitting on a park bench. That part of meditation, like just focusing on the breath, whether it's for a minute, 5 minutes, half an hour, that is really important. But I just would encourage people not to get caught up on the actual meditation part, because I think that and maybe it's not for you right now, and it might be something for you in the future, or something, but like there's other things you can do.
I totally agree with that, bro. It can be incredibly overwhelming for people, especially now that meditation has almost become the new tool of influencers on the internet to kind of push forward. And like, I guess a lot of what you hear about meditation, and a lot of the things that you end up expecting from meditation just don't tend to happen, mainly because you have these underlying expectations that the influencer who told you about all of these things that they'd experienced, which they probably actually didn't experience. They're probably just saying it for likes, potentially. Doesn't actually happen. So it ends up being a really negative experience. So I really, really appreciate you saying that, because I mean, like you say, if you just go for a run without your headphones on and without your phone there to distract you, and you're focusing on each step, each footfall, essentially what you're practicing there is mindfulness in a sense, and you're being in that moment. And like you said before, that's why so many people are drawn, I guess, to nature and extreme sports. Climbing a mountain, like you've done a bit of mountaineering yourself, like I've done a little bit of mountaineering myself. And when you're in that moment and you're so fucking cold, and you're just focused on the next footstep, and it could be the same with running as well, right? Like you're not anywhere else but in that moment.
I'm pretty sure you read the book. I've got it here with me now, actually. It's called Explorers of the Infinite. It was a book that I had during university, and I
never actually read it.
You never read it? Okay. Yeah, the author Maria Coffey, she taps into like spiritual stories and like kind of mindfulness stories of extreme sports people in the outdoors, and what they go through. And it's essentially that. It's just like being in that moment, Yeah, it's a pretty interesting book. I read it maybe 12 years ago, so I'm just started to reread it now. Yeah,
I'll put it in the show notes for anyone who wants to look at it, and I'll chuck it on my Amazon wish list, so it'll definitely be read.
I think there was something that I'd like that you've brought up, like kind of linking back to a few things we've talked about before that I would like to circle back to, and it is the topic around drugs actually. And by no means I'm going out to advocate for it, but I had a conversation with a friend recently before I flew out to New Zealand, and we were talking about that kind of switch from being quite certain on your view of the world and your perspective to kind of realizing that you don't really know too much, and trying to form new perspectives or new understanding. And he asked me, he's like, what do you think was the single biggest influence for making that switch? And I broke it down to, like, I actually broke it down to most of those conversations came from festivals, and I guess festivals were the first kind of environment in which, for me personally, quite late in life, kind of started to try different substances that I guess allowed these conversations to happen. And I guess, a lot of our socializing these days is done over alcohol. And it's well known that alcohol is a depressant, and you feel good for 2 or 3, and then if you ever notice, if you're sitting around with friends, that after 2 or 3 the conversation gets louder and more rowdy, and people kind of more personality comes out, and then after 5 or 6, then generally a conversation will become you start disagreeing with your friends. You become a bit more defensive. You put walls up. You defend your point of view, and you stop listening to other people. And for me personally, that's a general pattern that I've just noticed that happens. Whereas if you're, so let's just say you've taken some MDMA, and it could be in a festival setting or just in a house setting, and what I've noticed is that it breaks down barriers and walls, and allows, especially towards the end of the night or the end of the time that you're sitting around socializing, more kind of intimate parts of a conversation will come up, and you'll start discussing things that are more personal to you and that you might not have discussed before. And then you start hearing other people's points of view, and because of the chemical reaction in your brain, you become more empathetic and more understanding, and so you let that point of view come in, or you let that perspective come in, and that might alter the way you see something, or it just might alter the way that you view that person or their behavior, but generally in a compassionate way. And I'm not going to speak upon the science, although I've read some reports that is the case, that is what's going on, and it seems to ring true. And I think that's a super interesting thing, and I think that's when I really started to understand or listen to other people's points of views, or the way they see things, or the struggles that they have, that I wasn't aware of before.
I think that's really powerful. Thanks for sharing that, bro.
Yeah, cheers. I mean, you can sometimes achieve that stuff sitting around a campfire if everyone stays up long enough. But it takes a long time, and maybe these substances, you shouldn't rely on them, but maybe they fast track some of these conversations. And then what I have noticed amongst the group of friends in which these experiences have happened in the UK, is it's so much easier to replicate that conversation in a situation where there's no alcohol or no drugs the next time round. So because you've started the motion.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in regards to, you mentioned some of the studies that were being done around MDMA and ketamine and, other, I guess, substances that put you in this kind of altered state of mind is, like some of the trials they're doing are, on, ex-military who suffer from PTSD and people with anxiety and depression. And again, like you say, like neither of us should really comment on the science, and it's still relatively new, but a lot of the early studies are showing evidence that these people who have been unable to talk about and properly analyze these things that are going on in their head because they're so buried under all of the anxiety and the stress they feel of them, when they take these substances and they are in this altered state, they're able to talk about it objectively and actually understand what it is that's going on in their mind. And that kind of stuff is powerful. And when you look at the history of these drugs, that I can't remember the guy, it was a husband and wife that basically started this whole movement. I can't remember their names, but when they started creating these substances, their intention the whole time was to create something that would be used as medicine, not as something that was considered illegal or a party drug. But unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. But I think there's kind of this roundabout turn that's happening, right? Where it's getting to the point now where people are starting to realize, okay, hold on, like we actually can use these as a form of medicine instead of frowning upon them and refusing to understand the potential benefits.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's I hope it's a topic that just keeps getting studied and becomes more more commonly talked about. I think that's the only hope that we can kind of have for the for the subject. And it's a shame that we lost a lot of years of science through it being made elite. But I think you're referring to, I just had a quick Google search, is it Albert Hoffman and his wife?
That's the one. That's the one. I think Albert Hoffman recently passed away too, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I think a lot of these substances that have been synthesized, we're done in its initial stages for therapeutic reasons. And that I know they're used in recreational settings and social settings, and I've done that. And I each to their own, I guess. But I think it'd be what's definitely striking is the therapeutic part of it, and
So I guess as well, just from first of all, that Albert Hoffman dude, that guy was a cowboy. Did you hear the stories of him testing the drugs on himself? Like the trips that he would have had just figuring all this shit out is unbelievable. He's just like this grandpa figure in his little shack testing out, raw LSD and MDMA, and he's probably having these crazy trips. And he journaled the whole thing. It was mind blowing.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, there's a lot of people that have followed in his footsteps as well.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the topic of legalization, though, like it's going to be really interesting. I don't know if you follow much of what happens in Portugal right now with, they basically legalized everything. I'm not too sure on the exact specifics of it, but I think the initial results that they're seeing in terms of their legalization of drugs and being able to control it and offer people the help they need rather than them turning to like really, poorly made substances as an alternative. I think they're starting to see some really interesting results.
Yeah, I haven't read up too much. I don't think it's legalized. I think it's decriminalized, but it's not. So yeah, it's decriminalized for I think pretty much all from all substances, Class A included. So I guess that's definitely a step forward for people that are using, and it makes, but it doesn't really control the supply chain, and it doesn't really control the crime associated with that, and it doesn't, like how pure some of the substances are, which is still a big social dilemma, right? I think some of the initial studies coming out are showing that the rate of use and abuse, for that matter, are declining, and it's been treated as a health issue. which I guess all addiction should be treated as a health issue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah,
maybe we'll all become kind of Albert Hoffmans. I hope not. Everyone will be just way too high all the time.
Yeah. I guess I haven't delved into it too much, but I do have an interest in like the kind of more traditional psychedelic plant medicine stuff. That's pretty interesting to read up on and watch about. And I think a underlying theme is about connection, and it comes back to that word understanding again. Understanding our connection with the natural world, with the people around us, and therefore our understanding of ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree, but it's really interesting you just brought up plant medicine. One of the big things that I want to get into and understand more is ayahuasca, which I'm assuming you've probably heard of. It's kind of becoming the next big influencer thing, I guess. A lot of people kind of talking about it over the media, but more so what you're mentioning, just plant-based medicine in general. And like you said, that was, before screens and technology and all of the stuff that we have today, like that was, like you say, our connection to the natural world. And when you look we talked about this the other day, off air before recording this podcast, when you look at religious texts, and regardless of what the religious texts are, the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, the Old Testament, New Testament, whatever the religious texts are, there's constantly these references to I guess the usage of these plant-based medicines in a roundabout way. And it's really interesting to see that, archaeologists and researchers are starting to discover, these old tabernacles, for example, that have the remnants of, marijuana resin or plant-based medicines. And they're starting to realize more and more that these people were able to create these stories and this connection to nature and these amazing structures that so many people base their lives on now because they were in this altered state using plant-based medicines. It's mind-blowing.
And the science is progressing super fast, which is really interesting, and it's going to be really cool to see. Hopefully, the two come together. So, like traditional medicine, plant-based medicine, and some of the science. We can study brain activity, and we can document the changes that it creates in individuals. But I think it all comes back to it's probably it's resurfaced for a number of reasons, but I'd just say one of the main reasons is just it's just that long that search for who are we, why are we here, how do I fit into all this? And that's a search that's not new. That's not a question that has only been asked in the last century. That's just a question that's stand true for for since the beginning of humanity, really. And I think the way aspects of the Western world are heading, people are becoming disillusioned with some of the systems that are in place and the people that run those systems, and so they go, well, actually, I need to look somewhere else to find these answers, and they're heading to more Eastern practices.
I agree for sure. I would speculate as well that you speak of that kind of understanding of who we are and why we're here. And again, this is total speculation and this is my own theories, but I would wager that our ancestors, hunter-gatherers, and when these people were super connected with nature and they believed that death was just another gateway where, our being became something else and we're all part of something much, much greater than the individual. I would wager that those people had a real idea of their why and their purpose because they weren't so individualistic and they weren't so set on this life being the only thing that really matters. They were so much more connected with everything and realizing that they were just another cog in the wheel. What do you think about that?
Yeah, 100%. And I have been watching a few little documentaries and clips and stuff at the moment, and another common theme was that all these ceremonies were always taken very rarely was the medicine ever ingested by one individual at a time. It was always done in a practice of a ceremony. So the way in which they were conducted always meant there had to be multiple people taking part, and I think that's a large part of it, and I guess hopefully they will look at that, because I know right now some of the Western use of it and for like treatment of anxiety and depression is being done in, I could be wrong, but in a lot of cases it's been done on an individual basis. So like one person comes in with a psychologist and they get a treatment and that's amazing, right? But I think the environment in which it's conducted with multiple people is also seems to be part of it. So hopefully they keep looking into that.
I think they will, bro. I'm very optimistic about the space. The more kind of conversations I have about this, and the more that's kind of streamed through, more so now, like mainstream social media, I guess. It's not really mainstream media anymore. It's like mainstream social media.
Yeah.
You're kind of seeing more and more people warming up to the idea that, okay, well, I guess maybe we had it wrong about this stuff, and potentially this could be put to some incredible use.
Yeah.
Anyway, bro, how can we connect all of these completely diverse lessons that you've learned in your life so far, from entrepreneurship to smashing MDMA at festivals, and bring them into maybe 5 things that you've, I guess, learned that you would want to impart on someone who's listening to this, who's at a stage in their life where they think they've got everything sorted, but they know there's something missing, I guess, like you were when you were younger? What would be 5 things you would tell them to do now or consider doing now?
Okay. Yeah, I guess the first bit of advice, I wouldn't really say anything until they asked a question, because I think I've been guilty in the past of offering advice before listening to what the person has to say, and what what specific issues that they're concerned about, and then I would do my best to, which is not easy to do. Then I'd do my best not to then impose my experience on top of said person that is asking questions, which is super hard to do. And then I guess if that question was asked, I would probably just say things like, do what feels right. I think that's super important. And then I would say try to find balance in, maybe a question would be around like, I don't know what to do, or I don't know what I'm passionate about, or something like that, and try and find balance. So try and find out what other people are doing and what they're passionate about, and ask questions and find out how they got to where they were, and you might understand that, and that will then in turn hope you understand what you want to do. It also might confuse you more, but I think if it's done in the right way, you'll find more understanding. Yeah, and then I would just say, I don't know, like, try and block out the what ifs, like try and put them to one side. If you're if you're fortunate enough to have a supportive, which I guess not everyone is, but a lot of people are fortunate enough to have a supportive family and friends, then just try and block out the what ifs. Try and block out the, what if I lose my career or my job, or what if I can't buy a house within the next 5 years, or what if I lose all my savings? Like, it's kind of like, so it doesn't really matter. Like, You don't take any of it with you.
Exactly.
All you really get to look forward to is to sit in an old rocking chair and spinning an elaborate yarn about what you did 60 years ago. So, and you might as well have a good elaborate yarn to spin.
I like that. that.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
I think that's pretty good.
That was off the cuff, so I didn't really think about it.
Yeah, I think to kind of like pull out what you said there, that idea of thinking about the what ifs, it just paralyzes people with fear, and then they never actually do something. And it's funny, right? Like people sit there and go, oh, like I don't have any purpose, I don't have any meaning, so like what's the point in doing anything, because I've got to wait for purpose and meaning to come to me. And it's just simply not true. That's you starting to go into that mindset of questioning the what ifs. So like you're kind of waiting for something to happen rather than actually doing something. So I guess a big takeaway for me from that, and what I would add to that, is to just do things, to just try things and take some actions and learn along the way, like you did with those businesses. Maybe people don't have to set up a bar and 6 weeks close it down, but whatever it is that they try along the way, don't get caught up in the things that you fuck up. Just keep trying until you find something that gives you that kind of purpose and meaning.
Yeah, like you don't have to like I kind of just chucked everything into one basket and went for it, and that's one way of doing it. But you don't have to do it that way. Like if you've got an idea or something that you're passionate about, and you have a job, I've heard so many stories of employers being so much more accommodating. Just be open and honest and say, can I go to 4 days a week, or can I do 24 hours a week or something, and test it out on the side. Or even if you have to keep doing a full-time job, well, just give yourself 6 months to go, okay, can I get this idea off the ground? Has it got some legs? You can test out ideas in a lot more of a safe manner before jumping all in. But inevitably, the moment will come where you'll have to still make a decision about, do I really want to commit to this and go for it? So, yeah, there are different ways of doing it.
Cool, bro. Hey, before I guess I get your details, I don't know what social media you actually have anymore, so I don't know how people will stay in touch with you. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. So it's 4 now, and then you get one for me at the end.
Okay.
So I'll do some quick fire ones. First one, your dream business venture.
We've got this idea of the Common Lodge, which would be based on I got this idea of like a vineyard and a coffee roastery on the same place that has an events room that you can run organizational development out of.
Oh, that's sick.
Yeah. So vineyard, coffee roastery, like with a restaurant and then an events room that you can.
That's amazing. Is that something you'd want to do? Can you do that in Scotland? Like, does Scotland have vineyards?
No, it would be like more of a New Zealand or
I was going to say
or a European project. Yeah, but I think it'd be quite cool. It's been a bit of a joke that we've been passing around for a year now, but yeah,
it's kind of not becoming a joke anymore by the sounds of it.
I think we'd be at least a decade off doing something like that, but it'd be a nice way to pull it all together.
That's awesome, bro. Sick. Next one for you. Your next psychedelic experience. What's it going to be?
When I get out of this isolation, I got a friend that lives out in the Waitakaries, so we might have a Sunday afternoon, on some LSD or some mushrooms. Otherwise, I don't know. I'd really like to do it without any alcohol, and probably not in not at a festival. I've always been quite conservative I never taken too much to, so I don't know. I'm contemplating the idea of pushing it a little bit more.
Cool. You have to let me know about that.
We'll see.
And just anyone listening to this who thinks that this is a podcast that's telling you to go and take a bunch of drugs, please don't think that. Like, be smart.
Yeah. I guess, make your own, just do whatever feels right. Like make your own choices. Yeah.
100%. Okay. Next one. Number 1 book recommendation.
Ooh.
You mentioned Explorers of the Infinite before. Is it that, or maybe a different one?
No, it's not that. I've enjoyed reading that. Yeah, there's so many. I wouldn't say this is my number one book recommendation, but it is a book that I've just recently read, and it's a super simple read. And it is written by an American author, so it's no offense to American authors, but it is kind of it's a pretty full on, like it's kind of like in that kind of American style. But I've just recently got a dog in the last year and a half, and I never thought I'd own a dog, and I love having one. But this guy, he's written this book called Loving Everywhere. His name's Michael Chase.
Loving Everyone.
And it is along the ideas of, trying to live life the way a dog lives life and how it interacts with the world, which is very much in the moment and very much like non-judgmental. And I think there's a lot of cool things that you can pull from it. So it's a very easy read, and it's a bit of a laugh. And if you've had a dog before, you will laugh through it. But yeah, it's a nice book. It's cool.
I love that. Maybe it'll get people acting like dogs, especially during this this crazy period. I mean, one thing that I've noticed for sure is, as much as COVID-19 is affecting humans, dogs are pumped, man. Like, they're still pumped. They don't know anything's going on. They're still, licking butts and sniffing butts and pooping everywhere and watching their owners pick it up. Like, they just don't give a fuck. So maybe it'll allow people to be a little bit more present, like dogs, but just without the poop everywhere.
Yeah.
Last one for you, bro.
Yeah.
What would you do in the event of a zombie apocalypse?
Does it just happen, or is there pre-warning that's an impending doom?
That's a good follow-up question. I'm going to say it's just happened, because
it just happens. I try and probably, I guess, because I don't own one, I'd have to try and find like an abandoned yacht or steal a yacht or jump on somebody's yacht and find a way to a deserted island and just go live there for a while.
Nice.
Turn my phone off.
Nice. Yeah. I like that. I guess you just got to focus on the food thing and the water. So you'd have to pick a good deserted island.
Yeah. Yeah. There's probably quite a few off New Zealand.
Yeah, true that. You go to Waiheke, mate. You could go to Waiheke and build a lodge. It's
not deserted though, is it?
Yeah, true.
Okay, zombies might like it there.
Free wine. Cool, bro. Yeah. You get a question for me.
All right. I got a somewhat of a serious question. Okay. I just want to get your perspective on something, and it is a subject that gets talked about a lot at the moment through a whole lot of like self-help mediums, and that's to do with like losing your ego. And I know I've watched a bit of your podcasts in the past, and I know it's a topic that you've discussed quite a bit. Mm-hmm. There is a famous philosopher called Alan Watts who came out with a saying, and the saying was, one of the biggest ego trips going around is the idea of losing your ego. What do you think about that?
Say it again.
One of the biggest ego trips going around is the idea that you can get rid of your ego.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. It makes sense, because I think as much as you try, and people have tried, I don't think anyone's ever fully gotten rid of their ego, apart from maybe some monks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially that's something I battled with a few years ago when I started getting into meditation. And I've realized more and more that, especially because I've experienced a lot of, short-term pleasures, and I've experienced a lot of short-term suffering, I think it almost makes it, I think it's almost impossible to do so unless you grow up in an environment which is, 100% inherently altruistic or completely abandoned of ego, which is why I think a lot of monks get close.
Yeah.
Because they literally grow up in an environment where they're not able to develop a strong sense of ego, because they abandon themselves from pleasures like the majority of us do. So I think if you haven't had that growing up, I agree with that quote. Like it's kind of a pointless aim. You've just got to learn to manage it, really.
Yeah, because I think like harness well, like, you know, I think the word ego is kind of misrepresented quite a lot, and like, you know, harnessed well, it is something that creates drive, that creates determination, you know, and those are things that are really good, and you know, and some of those things come from a sense of self-belief, you know, and those aspects of it, I think, are very beneficial to not only us as individuals but also society. Obviously used in a more narcissistic way, you know, it's not healthy. So I don't know, just I know it's a topic that's discussed widely, and it's featured on your show, and I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think we could probably spend 2 hours discussing it and still only gain about 0.005% of traction. But
yeah,
no, I like it. That was a good one.
Cool.
I've not had that question at all before, so thank you for that.
Sweet. It's been fun.
Bro, do you have anywhere that people can get a hold of you? Are you on any social medias?
I have a purse. Yeah, I've deactivated Facebook, unfortunately, and I kind of, I've stayed strong for a while now, so I think I'm just going to keep that deactivated. But I use Instagram. I don't post that much, but I am active on it. Yeah, so you can get in touch. It's just Jase, Jase, and then Harvey.
Yeah, nice. No. And what about your business? So Common Coffey.
Oh yeah, Common Coffey is Common.
Cool. Yeah. And for anyone who wants to get delicious coffee, you do international orders, right?
Yeah, we ship all across the world. I think there's quite a significant delay at the moment to Australia.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. We've shipped a few times to Australia.
Yeah, nice. I think the audience now anyway is quite global. I think 20% of my audience is American, which is surprising. Yeah, so for anyone who does want to have some delicious coffee, I'll leave that in the show notes. And if you want to maybe send Jace a message and get philosophical, or maybe talk about MDMA or business, I mean, two very contrasting ideas, but yeah, I'll leave your Instagram in there as well.
Cool. Awesome. Cheers.
Thanks, bro. It's been awesome.
Cool. It's been fun. Yeah.
Hello again, friend. Thanks for listening to the entirety of that episode. I truly appreciate you tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whatever platform you're using. And if you're using Apple Podcasts, huge favor to ask you, can you please leave a 5-star rating, leave a comment, leave a review, and be sure to share this with anyone in your life that you think it'll impact positively. Each and every rating and review that we get on Apple Podcasts helps beat the algorithm and get the podcast out to more people. And I think these conversations are worth sharing. So thanks once again, and we'll see you in the next episode of Couple of Lattes.